CFF quarterback rankings and a huge batch of spring practice news and notes from across college football after the Stinger. Hello and welcome to Good Morning College Football. I'm Nicholas Ian Allen of CampusToCanton.com. This is episode 25. We are coming to you on a Thursday morning, little out of our regular schedule. Thank you for your patience this week as we had to do some shuffling with another obligation yesterday morning, but good to be back. And there is a ton of information to discuss. Spring practices kicking off all over the place. Dozens of teams hit the practice field since we last spoke on Monday. But first and foremost, if you are unfamiliar with Campus to Canton, it's a college fantasy football company playing the C2C format that encompasses both college and NFL players. If you would like to join a league, a great place to find out more information is the CampusToCanton.com Discord community. You can get access to that at CampusToCanton.com if you're kind enough to join us there for as little as $2.99 per month. We've got a wide range of packages and content options that go all the way up to our All 22 and C2C Winning Edge tier packages that include everything that we do. The All 22, our most in-depth information, including our CFB Winning Edge and C2C Winning Edge returning production database, which we talk about a lot on this show, as well as our team profiles. Our 2023 team profiles are still being updated with transfer information, any updates based on spring practice notes in terms of injuries or guys dropping off the roster. But we are also working hard on our 2024 team profiles and making some good progress there. Our target date to publish is May 1st. So there will be a lot more available soon as far as our 2024 team profiles go. But first here on the show, have to start with some college fantasy football quarterback rankings. And the Gridiron Scholar John Laub, absolutely one of the best people in the business, not just in terms of the content he provides, which is excellent. And that includes the first down rankings, his first down post on Fantrax. John does a series with Fantrax each year. He's, of course, involved with other content creators as well. Now's a very busy time for him preparing for the NFL draft. But his very in-depth first down post, which went live on Fantrax a couple of days ago, Tuesday morning, I believe, offers not only rankings for every position and a long list. I mean, there are 55 quarterbacks who are listed here. It looks like 66 running backs, 70 wide receivers, and then, of course, 24 tight ends. So John is very early in the process as far as posting full rankings so far. I personally have not yet fully turned on my CFF brain for 2024. I've been so stuck on, the to-do list of CFB Winning Edge stuff, basically, the returning production database and now the team profiles, that I've kind of shied away a little bit. Usually I would have done half a dozen CFF best balls by now, but scaled back a little bit after that very first way too early draft that Jared Palmgren put together for Chasing the Natty and Campus to Canton. And so it's strange because generally this time of year, as I'm like trying to dig through so much information of who's coming back, who's not, transfers, injuries, depth chart, projections, who's first, who's second, who's third in drills, some of the stuff that we talk about here, and we'll talk about more a little later in the show. Usually CFF actually kind of keeps me grounded, helps me kind of stay up on having a little bit better or clearer vision of how these players stack up to each other. So I really do need to get into more of a CFF mindset. I need to jump into a best ball or two. And John, as part of this first post, give some outlines on what he thinks is a good scoring format for CFF best balls specifically. But then I love that he also includes, and John's been great about this for a long time, putting out questions to the community, getting feedback. He of course does a great job, knows as much, if not more, than anybody else in the community. But I think he offers a great opportunity for people to, provide some feedback. And one of the things listed in the article here talks about, undervalued CFF players and the quarterback position specifically. John highlights Miller Moss at USC, perhaps early in the offseason, a little under the radar, given the background of Lincoln Riley coached quarterbacks. And of course, Moss really exploded in the bowl game when he had an opportunity to start after Caleb Williams was ready to move on to his pro career. John mentions Brady Cook at Missouri, who we have talked a good bit about this spring. And as Mizzou's wrapped up their spring practices, Rocco Becht at Iowa State, an interesting name to me, and somebody that we'll talk about a little bit later in today's show. But, John put out a poll to the community on Twitter and asked, among this group of four, and he listed DeQuan Finn, the incoming transfer at Baylor. Baylor just kicked off spring practice a couple of days ago. Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, who we've talked about a little bit, and of course has taken over for Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels there at LSU. Becht at Iowa State, and then Connor Wegman of Texas A&M. And he includes some feedback from content creators, serious CFF players as well, and how the poll breaks down. But I really want to dig into John's rankings just a little bit, at least as far as the top 10 goes, because as I said, my CFF brain, I haven't fully turned it on yet, but the little bit that I have dug into it, quarterback has certainly been top of mind. And so I do have a little bit of sort of a working top 10 here in my brain, and like to see how it compares to someone like John, who's already putting his full rankings out there on display for the public. So to the surprise of probably no one who has dabbled in any CFF so far this year, whether it was, that way too early draft months ago, or as part of as part of any of the best balls that are going on in a variety of places. Curious to see if folks agree with this, but to me, it's pretty clear. The top three would probably be behind top three. Number one, Kaidon Salter at Liberty, huge year last year, perfect fit in Jamie Chadwell's system at Liberty. Was one of the very best, most productive quarterbacks in the country last season, and to me seems like a pretty clear number one. Number two, Dillon Gabriel, transferred from Oklahoma to Oregon, also a great fit, I think, for what his new offensive coordinator Will Stein wants to do at Oregon. We mentioned it a little bit last week. Yeah, Gabriel, in those first two very early Oregon spring practices, wasn't the first quarterback to take a snap, but I fully expect not only is he going to start this year, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I think there's going to be a smooth transition from Bo Nix, who of course put up huge numbers last year, and we've seen what Gabriel can do at Oklahoma, and then of course UCF prior to that. Number three, Byrum Brown, one of my very favorite quarterbacks in college football. There are reports out of USF that Brown has put on some weight, but of course he's still highly athletic, that offense with head coach Alex Golish and its roots, his roots specifically with Josh Heupel at Tennessee and prior to that, just a system that has been CFF gold in the past. So, Brown is going to be able to put up really big passing totals, but also can really do some damage on the ground. So absolutely agree with that as the top three. And then, from there's certainly some potential for, I think, some jockeying, I guess. Haynes King at Georgia Tech had a huge year last year, really a very pleasant surprise after transferring over from Texas A&M. King is John's fourth quarterback listed. We've talked about the huge level of returning production on the offensive side of the ball that Georgia Tech has. They're in a pretty select group of offenses that return basically, large numbers at every category. The passing production is all coming back. The receiving production, for the most part, they rank very, very highly in. And as we talked about on Monday, that group is getting healthier with guys like Chase Lane coming back and fully healthy. Other newcomers getting into the mix as well, potentially another true freshman who could have an impact this year, but also, more guys that missed time, like Leo Blackburn last season, for example. So Haynes King, I think absolutely you could make an argument he's a top 5 quarterback. I personally would probably slot John's number 5 and number 6 quarterbacks just slightly ahead of King, but certainly agree that they are right in that mix. Maybe even his number 7 quarterback, and that's Garrett Green at West Virginia is his number 5. Number 6, Jaxson Dart at Ole Miss, which if you listen to the CFP Winning Edge podcast, we've done the Heisman Trophy slow draft the last 3 episodes, and that's something that we're going to continue throughout the spring and summer. Jaxson Dart was my first Heisman pick, the number 3 overall pick. I think Ole Miss is just set up to really, really make a run at a playoff spot, at maybe an SEC title, and who knows beyond that. And Jaxson Dart is going to be a huge part of it. The turnover that they've had in the running game, I think, is going to help Dart a bit. I think we're going to see not only he's going to work with one of the deepest wide receiver groups in the country, but I think that he is going to continue to be a productive runner and probably in line to put the ball in the end zone quite a bit. I think they're really, really going to lean on him as a senior. KJ Jefferson is number 7 at UCF. Also seems like just a perfect marriage of skill set for a player, an experienced player like KJ Jefferson, who's been productive in his career at Arkansas. Can throw it, certainly, but is also a very willing runner. Hopefully he is going to be at full strength, but at, what is he, 6'5", 250, something along those lines. Just a punishing runner. And Gus Malzahn's offense at UCF is very well designed to take advantage of a quarterback who is a willing runner, but also, there's a lot of talent at the running back position with R.J. Harvey, which could perhaps limit Jefferson's upside just a touch, but I think that his size and strength is going to be key down by the goal line. But also really like some of the wide receivers there as well. Kobe Hudson being the headliner. I think he's in line to step into not only the level of production that Javon Baker had last season for UCF, where they were almost co-number ones. Baker a little bit more productive, but Hudson, I think, is in line for a huge year, especially with Jefferson perhaps a little bit better passer. That's probably fair to say than John Rice Plumlee was last season for UCF. But to me, I absolutely agree with that, top 7. And it's really hard, I think, to go wrong. I know there is a lot of depth at the quarterback position in general. I haven't participated in a whole lot as far as drafts. Obviously, just the one mock very, very early on, but I try to follow along when I see stuff on Twitter, when I see stuff in the Campus to Canton Discord, and of course our Slack group. Usually I'm able to keep up a little bit with folks like Jared and Nate Marquise, Ethan Sowers, Chris Kay, Chris Moxley, who are very, very involved in a lot of these ongoing drafts to see, okay, a lot of folks are, going, whatever I'm not I don't always get the terms right. But the zero quarterback strategy where you just wait on that position because there's so much depth and there really is. But that top 7, I think you're in position to have just some elite production. John has Seth Hennigan from Memphis at number 8, Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee, number 9. I think you can make an argument maybe Nico is worthy of jumping into that, top 1 or 2 tiers there. Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. Absolutely think that he's set up for success. Miller Moss at 11 is probably a little higher than most might expect. I know Jared's talked a bit. There's been some discussion on Chasing the Natty and others about Moss as being undervalued. John's definitely putting his foot down and saying that Moss is a QB1. Basically, right? Top 12 quarterbacks. If you're in a 12-team league, Moss is very much in that group. A couple of players that personally, as I'm looking at my rankings, I think I'm a little bit higher on. I took in that very first draft. I think he ended up being a top 5 quarterback selection. Maybe that was probably a touch too high, especially after the change at head coach at Boston College, moving to Bill O'Brien. I know there's a little bit of skepticism about his offense and the fit for Thomas Castellanos, but early in spring practice, as we've talked about some of those reports, I feel pretty confident that Castellanos is certainly going to put up good passing numbers. I think we're going to see him take a step forward passing, and I think he's even though there is a pretty solid running back duo at Boston College, Kai Robichaux, Trayshawn Ward, seems like those guys are kind of splitting those number 1 running back duties early in spring camp. But I still think Castellanos is going to be a productive runner. I think his scrambling ability is off the charts. And so I would firmly have Castellanos in my top 10. I might be willing, I think at this point, to have him in that 7 or 8 range. I'd probably put Seth Hennigan just a little bit lower than what John has. And then number 16, Jalen Milroe. I think I'm now fully on board that Milroe has zero worry as far as any sort of, competition, somebody come in and taking his job. Milroe struggled a little bit early last season, as we all know, got benched for the USF game, but then quickly regained that spot atop the depth chart and became one of the best quarterbacks in college football from a fantasy perspective, certainly, but from an overall perspective as well. I've said several times on this show, and it's definitely just my go-to description of Milroe right now. He's the leading returner as far as Heisman Trophy votes in college football. And I know, once we get to the summer months and those team profiles are out and published in the world, the next thing on my to-do list are our team and player stat projections. I have a feeling Milroe is just going to be off the charts because we factor in, not only the team's history, the player's history, but the play caller history and what Michael Penix did and Kalen DeBoer's offense, Nick Sheridan being there at Washington as well, now coming over as the OC at Alabama. I wouldn't be surprised if just in terms of pure numbers, Jalen Milroe ends up projecting as our top quarterback. So will I be that high on him? Probably not. But I think that he's definitely going to be, top 3 in those just overall projections as far as our stat projections go. But I think that I would clearly put Milroe in that top 10 as well. But excellent work as always from John. And I just want to highlight John Laub as a great person in the industry. He has if it comes right down to it, the reason I'm sitting here talking to you today is in large part due to John Laub. Not only was he one of the very first to champion the work that I was doing at CFB Winning Edge way back in 2018, 2019. It was a big part of the CFF community embracing that work that I did, but also John was kind enough to invite me to the King's Classic League and draft in Canton, Ohio back in 2021, where I met the good folks at Campus to Canton, and things kind of evolved from there, and a couple of years later ended up joining the group, and very appreciative to John for his support of me personally, but also just his support of college fantasy football and the other content creators in the space. He is just a huge champion for our game and for individual folks who love the game and produce content for it. So do check out John's rankings at fantrax.com. Read his work when it comes out. Support him when you can, because he's definitely supporting all of us. And John, we really appreciate it. All right, moving on a little bit to the news from spring practice. We're going to go fairly quick today because there is so much that has gone on. I mentioned this when we were recording the CFP Winning Edge podcast last night, that it kind of felt like that first day of fall camp. The way I do things, I try to read as much as possible. If you write, anywhere out there, an article as a beat reporter, as somebody who writes for a team site, if you put something along the lines of 5 observations from practice number 1, I am going to try to put my eyes on that in some way. And that first day of of fall camp in August, usually right around August 1st, is one of those where there's 100 of those articles, and it gets overwhelming pretty quickly. In spring, it's kind of spread out a bit, right? And if you've been here with us at any point over our first 24 episodes of Good Morning College Football, the teams that kicked off spring practice first, the Hawaiis, the Liberties, the Air Forces. That Mizzou had its spring game, the first sort of like premier spring game of this cycle. But also, that there's been sort of a steady increase in the number of teams that kicked off spring practice. And then this week, it is just exploding. I mean, there are dozens of teams who kicked off. Cal, Colorado, Tennessee, Baylor, Florida State, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisville, Memphis, Michigan State, Mississippi State, USC, South Carolina, Iowa. That's not even the entire list, but those are the teams that either started early this week or are going to kick off at some point later this week. Wisconsin, I think, is Friday as well. So there's just a lot to take in, and we'll try to sift through what we can. Not only the teams that are kicking off its first spring practice, but those like Auburn who returned after a little bit of a break. And so Andrew Stefaniak and Brian Smith of Auburn Daily had a couple of different posts this week, kind of catching us up from weekend press conferences with head coach Hugh Freeze, also some practice observations from earlier in the week. So no surprise, the order of quarterbacks seemingly the same, with Auburn getting back on the field after its short break. Peyton Thorne taking those number 1 reps, Holden Gurner, Hank Brown, and then Walker White rounding out the 4 scholarship quarterbacks. It sounded like Thorne had a little bit, I believe this is in reference to a practice on Tuesday, had a bit of an up and down day, did throw a pick 6, which apparently was blamed on a receiver running a wrong route, but nevertheless, something you're always looking at for a quarterback, and especially one who's going to be under as much scrutiny as Peyton Thorne and that offense that hopefully will be taking a step forward in 2024. Also had some inaccurate throws, but Stefaniak and Smith also wanted to highlight a few impressive throws that Peyton Thorne made, connecting with true freshman Cam Coleman on a long touchdown, Camden Brown on a long touchdown. And then after practice on Tuesday, Hugh Freeze, quoting here from the piece, said, Peyton Thorne is still the most consistent because he's had the most reps and the most understanding of what defenses can do to you. So reading from the piece, I think put pretty well here. It says, every time we hear from Coach Freeze, it sounds more and more like Thorne will be Auburn's starting quarterback in 2024. Will Auburn, be active in the spring transfer portal window? Potentially. Will the starting quarterback for the Tigers, is that player currently on the roster? I don't think it's a guarantee. There's still plenty of speculation that Freeze might bring in somebody to take this job basically from Peyton Thorne and as this team is looking to take the next step. But I think that Thorne, and I've mentioned this before, his second year on campus, second year in the system, the amount of experience that he has as a senior, I think we are going to see a better Peyton Thorne. So if he is able to hold on to this job, if he's able to avoid an incoming transfer taking it away, or to hold off a player who maybe is brought in, I think that Thorne is going to have a pretty decent season. And trying to scroll down in John's list here, I'm curious to see Peyton Thorne. I don't see him in the top 55 quarterback. So that's interesting. I'm definitely, whenever I get back into it, am going to take a flyer on Peyton Thorne until we hear that he really is in danger of losing that job. South Carolina kicked off spring practice this week. Chris Clark of Gamecock Central, Andrew Leon of Gamecock Digest, both had some takeaways in practice observations and spring previews. I believe we may have mentioned before that Rocket Sanders, the transfer running back from Arkansas, is not expected to participate in spring. He is still rehabbing a shoulder injury. The depth at running back, pretty good still at South Carolina, even with Sanders sidelined for the spring, and do expect that Sanders will be clearly the number one ball carrier for the Gamecocks. But they also brought in Oscar Attaway from North Texas, Juwan Howell from South Carolina State at the FCS level, a productive running back, DJ Braswell and Juju McDowell still there. So even though Mario Anderson transferred to Memphis, another team that kicked off this week, there's a lot of depth there. To no surprise, and we mentioned it very, very early on in our Good Morning College Football, Lenore Sellers was first in the quarterback drills. He was first in one of the quick offensive periods that was available there to the public, or to the media. Robbie Ashford, the transfer from Auburn, was the number 2 quarterback, followed by Davis Bevel and Dante Reno. That's early. That was practice number 1, a report there from Leon at Gamecock Digest. There's some interesting quotes to me. I love when we get a coach to nerd out a little bit, and Dowell Loggains, offensive coordinator at South Carolina, met with the media after practice number 2, and Clark was on hand for some of these quotes. And someone asked, does Loggains ever ask defensive coaches about what gives them the most trouble? And that's a very common practice, among coaches. It's going to happen, anytime there's downtime before a team or a staff meeting gets going. I mean, those are conversations that pop up all the time, just casually. But Loggains went into, some great depth about particular coaches who are currently coaching elsewhere, who he is, continually discussing that type of thing with. So here, quoting from Clark, his piece. This is Loggains say, yeah, absolutely. We have friends all over the place, and we all talk about football, and we all confide in. I got to the point where probably 10, 12 years ago in my 30s, I'm like, you need to start learning defensive football as much as you know offensive football, and talking to defensive guys about, hey, what creates problems for you? Or talk to me about play calling versus tempo offense versus a huddle offense. What are the ins and outs? So you're trying to find every advantage you can, and talking to defensive coaches helps. I was just talking to Travian Robertson downstairs about fit and zone runs versus gap schemes, and some of my best friends in coaching are defensive guys. When I was in Chicago, I used to wear Vic Fangio out. Hey, what creates issues versus this? Or why'd you do this? Or why are people playing four eyes? And just everyone you come across, you're trying to find an advantage. And the best way to find advantage is gain knowledge, and not only just offensive football, but knowing why people do stuff on defense and the structure of defenses. One of the things that I always love to see, and Shane Beamer is a really interesting example of this, in my opinion. I love when a coach has experience actually coaching on both sides of the football. Extensive special teams experience is another plus. But to really have the working knowledge to be able to coach a position, or certainly to coordinate a unit on both sides of the football, is pretty rare, but also just a great way to prepare oneself, for more responsibility down the road, and eventually becoming a head coach. So I certainly these guys have so much more knowledge than I do. But that's something I like to pay attention to is specific experience on both sides of the ball, but also, even if they don't, Loggains been an offensive coach his entire career, but is very active in asking defensive coaches that he knows in the game, on staff with. You mentioned, in his time at Penn State, he would always pick the brain of Brent Pry, now head coach at Virginia Tech, Barry Odom, when they were on the staff together at Arkansas. Odom was the defensive coordinator. Now he's the head coach at UNLV. Is one of his best friends in coaching, and they talk multiple times per week. So pretty nerdy conversation, not super applicable to CFF or anything like that, but I'm a sucker for that sort of stuff. So wanted to mention it. At LSU, Zach Nagy of LSU Country was on hand for the post-spring break practices there in Baton Rouge on Wednesday morning. The media had about 20 minutes of viewing, according to Nagy. You mentioned, of course, Garrett Nussmeier continues to look sharp. It was worth noting that A.J. Swan is now number 2 in the quarterback drills. He had started in week 1 in third place in those drills behind Ricky Collins, but it sounds like Swan, the transfer from Vanderbilt, has quickly emerged as Nussmeier's top backup. At wide receiver, Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton remain the basically all-time starters, first team wide receivers, taking the most snaps. Aaron Anderson and Kyle Parker are rotating in with those number ones as well. You'll notice I didn't say the name CJ Daniels. According to Will Nickel of the Tiger Rag, Xavion Thomas, Aaron Anderson, and CJ Daniels worked with Swan on the second team offense on Wednesday. Mac Markway was the number 2 tight end after Mason Taylor working with Nussmeier. And at the running back position, Josh Williams was the number 1 running back ahead of Caleb Jackson. And as we mentioned before, those two are the only scholarship running backs currently available for spring practice. Malachi Lane reportedly was the third teamer there. So CJ Daniels, Kaidon Salter's former top target and a very, very explosive wide receiver at Liberty, still working to move up the depth chart. So something worth noting there. I still think that he's got a very high ceiling, but perhaps just getting a much slower start than most expected. But it seems clear right now that Kyron Lacey probably in line to be the number 1 top target at LSU. And perhaps if you're looking for number 2, you might bet on Chris Hilton at this point ahead of CJ Daniels. All right, a few more notes here. We'll try to move quickly through this and save a little time at the end to talk in depth a little bit about our team of the day, Duke. But some notes on Iowa State, Louisville, and Tennessee. At Iowa State, the Iowa State Daily student newspaper. Student newspapers are a great source of information. Certainly, try to support your local newspaper, and traditional newspapers do a great job. But, unfortunately, trying to cover 134 plus teams, we can't have, a subscription to every single newspaper. And so student newspapers are often a free source of information. Radio stations, their websites are often a free source of information. News, TV news, local TV is also a great local free source. A lot of team sites do a great job as well. But Christian Royston of the Iowa State Daily had some quotes from new offensive coordinator Taylor Mouser, who has been promoted to play caller in his 9th season on the Iowa State staff, taking over for Nate Scheelhaas, who's moved on to the NFL. Also spoke with Rocco Becht, the underrated quarterback, according to John Laub, and I have to think I agree. This Iowa State offense and a big part of this story was focusing on they're going to be taking some shots downfield. Not only is there more speed, there's great size in the wide receiver core, backed with that full, season of starting experience under his belt. Seems like Iowa State, I know there's a lot of excitement about running back Abu Sama and the work that he did, especially at the end of last season as a true freshman, and the track record of Iowa State running backs getting a pretty heavy workload. But I'm personally excited about the passing attack at Iowa State, and it sounds like Becht and Mouser are as well. So quoting here from the piece, this is Rocco Becht said, "We've got guys now to be able to stretch the field." According to Mouser, quote, "That's the plan, more passes and more deep balls." That was Beck as well. But of course, we know Jalen Noel, Jaden Huggins, they are both back. Noel, the speedster, Higgins, the bigger target, really came on after transferring in last year. Freshman tight end Benjamin Brahmer is a personal favorite of mine. He is back, and I think in line for a really, really strong season. He's currently tight end 17 on John Laub's list. I might be tempted to push him a little bit closer to that top 12. But a solid offense altogether. And then they added one of my favorite incoming transfer wide receivers of the cycle, and a guy that I think is flying a little bit under the radar, is Isaiah Alston, the transfer from Army. I think he's a future pro, somebody who wasn't featured, obviously, in that triple option heavy offense at Army. But Alston averaged about 30 yards per catch because, that offense relies on big plays whenever they choose to throw, which is rare. There are opportunities for those big plays, but Alston, I think, is very, very talented and very capable. Mouser, quoting here in the piece, said he was able to make some incredible plays down the field. That was the emphasis for us this offseason, is we want to push the ball downfield a little bit more. Alston, as I said, a 6'4" target, does have a little bit of speed as well. I just think that even if he is a number 3 wideout, that is just a solid Iowa State wide receiver core, and I think Alston is going to be a factor. I'm not sure how much he'll limit the real upside, the ceiling of a player like Noel or Higgins, but I do think that he is going to be a factor in that passing attack, and I think that Rocco Becht is just going to benefit. Louisville had its first spring practice earlier this week, and I do want to say, again, talking about sites that offer a lot of free content, Louisville Report, Matthew McGavich is one of my favorites for that. Goes very in depth anytime he's able to get a good look at practice. Card Chronicle, the SB Nation site. There's a nice in-depth write-up from Cardinal Strong there. But on Tuesday, those two were on hand for the first practice, and according to McGavich, unsurprisingly, Texas Tech transfer Tyler Shuck got almost all of the first team reps. Behind him, walk-on Harrison Bailey, former, really, really highly rated high school recruit Harrison Bailey, but technically a walk-on at Louisville now, got second team reps alongside Pierce Clarkson. There seems to be a little bit of conflicting information from the two stories as to whether or not Bailey or Clarkson was kind of the clear number two. Sounds like maybe they were splitting that role somewhat evenly. And then Brady Allen was mostly in the mix with the threes. At running back, Toledo transfer Penny Boone got a lot of the number one reps, but Maurice Turner and Miami transfer Donald Chaney, as well as Keywan Brown and Isaac Brown, all got plenty of action as well. At wide receiver, from a CFF standpoint, the Louisville wide receiver pecking order is of the utmost importance. So it's notable that Ja'Cory Brooks, the transfer from Alabama, and Colin Lacey, the transfer from South Alabama, were, according to McGavich, the two wide receivers most regularly with the ones. Although the position shuffled often throughout the day, Tuskegee transfer Antonio Meeks, Jadon Thompson, formerly of Cincinnati, and Chris Bell, who saw some action last year as well, were the guys who were most often shuffling with the ones. At tight end, there's a lot of excitement about Mark Redmond transferring in from San Diego State, but he won't be there until the summer. So as of right now, though they rotated, it says here, almost every single tight end got involved throughout the day. The most often playing with the ones was Miami transfer Jaleel Skinner, and then Jamari Johnson, the sophomore, second-year player. A quick note from McGavich. He said that Penny Boone and Don Chaney, he says, who I assume will eventually become RB1 and 2, are, quote, certified beefy boys, which just a funny way of putting it, but I think definitely true. And then beyond that, Lacey, the talking about some observations during 1-on-1, 7-on-7, and 11-on-11. He said that this period is where he began to see that Lacey can be an elite slot receiver in the ACC because of his size. His release off the line is insanely fast and routinely got quick and easy separation. So good news there for Colin Lacey. I know I saw a depth chart projection from a newspaper in Louisville prior to spring practice last week. Sometime actually had Lacey projected as a backup. I think that's probably not going to end up being correct. I think it's pretty clear he's going to be a major piece of this offense. From Card Chronicle, they talked a little bit about the wide receivers as well, got a little more context, asked, who is the next man up? Well, if today is any indication, again, talking about Tuesday, the quarterbacks and staff trust Jadon Thompson a lot more than what we saw in 2023, said that Shuck targeted Thompson at one point, 3 out of 4 reps. So take that for what it's worth. Probably not much at this early stage, but perhaps a little bit of a rapport there between the quarterback and wide receiver. Said that you could tell the staff is excited about Colin Lacey, who, of course, was a first-team All-Sun Belt receiver for the Jags at South Alabama last year. They said he was coming out of the slot, lining up wide all over the place to try to find space. So curious to see, is he going to be a slot receiver far more often than not, or is he going to be one of those receivers that moves around in a variety of positions? I think is worth noting. All right, moving very quickly, going to try to round out some notes from places like Notre Dame, Colorado, USC, Texas Tech, and then we'll save some more for Friday. But at Tennessee, Patrick Brown of Go Vols 247 was on hand for practice early this week. I believe Tennessee kicked off its third practice this morning, Thursday. These observations were Tuesday. Among the players who are not practicing this spring, offensive lineman Javonte Spraggins, Andre Karich, wide receivers Brew McCoy and Nathan Leacock, linebacker Elijah Herring, and safety Christian Charles. So keep that in mind when we talk about wide receiver pecking order and things like that. But the number one offense early on in that first practice seemed to be Nico Iamaleava. At quarterback, running back Dillon Sampson. The wide receivers were Squirrel White, Caleb Webb, and Chris Brazel II, the transfer from Tulane. Know a lot of folks are high on him, and I agree. At tight end, it was Ethan Davis. Dante Thornton Jr., a player, quite honestly, I was way too high on last year from a CFF standpoint, but still like his skill set. Hopefully he'll be fully healthy. Sounded like, according to Patrick Brown, when the second group of first teamers took the field, Thornton replaced Brazel with that second set of wide receivers. Wide receiver Chaz Nimrod also worked in the slot behind Squirrel White, but he did get some reps on the outside as well. Dante Thornton was a player who repped at both the slot and on the outside last year also. So no surprise there that Josh Heupel's going to be rotating guys at different positions. Tight end Holton Stays, the transfer from Notre Dame, and running back Cameron Seldon also got several reps with the number one offense. At Notre Dame, speaking of, Brian Driscoll of the Irish Breakdown had, just a little window to view a practice on Wednesday. Said that there were only 5 periods available to the media, and there wasn't too much to note. But he did pass along that at running back, there was a lot of, look very explosive, the group as a whole. But Jadarian Price really stood out. Quoting here from the piece, his change of direction and suddenness was really, really impressive. He looks like pre-injury Price. His burst is really special, and that was on display today. Said the other backs look good as well. And kind of an interesting observation here, there were some reps with both Price and Jeremiah Love on the field together. So keep that in mind as we move along in the spring. At Colorado, Brian Howell of Buff Zone. One of the major takeaways, of course, there's plenty of conversation on guys like Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, two of the best players at their respective positions, and in Hunter's case, multiple positions in college football. But somebody who stood out early in practice one was Omarion Miller. And he, of course, had one huge game last year, but otherwise didn't do a ton as a true freshman for the Buffs. But a couple of quotes here that Howell had. Liberty transfer defensive back Preston Hodge was asked, who has impressed him so far. He was very complimentary of Miller, said, quote, he's a dog. Also said that Miller was the most impressive outside receiver that he's covered. And then wide receiver coach Jason Phillips had kind of an interesting quote, said, I like Omarion Miller. I'm starting to fall in love with Omarion Miller. It's a matter of him continuing to mature and to be the player that we all expect him to be, and obviously be the player that he expects to be. He's taking the right steps towards that. A couple of other quick notes. Defensive end coach Vincent Dancy said that Arden Walker, defensive end, is going to be out this spring after hand surgery. The Buffs are a little short-handed at wide receiver, so perhaps there's an opportunity for Miller really to, make a name for himself heading into the summer. Jimmy Horn Jr. has been limited by injury, and then Will Shepard, the transfer from Vanderbilt, is not going to be on campus until the summer. Also, Travis Hunter, in that first practice on Monday, spent his time at cornerback. He, of course, will play receiver. And the expectation, and I believe this ended up being the case, was that he would be at receiver on Wednesday. But Phillips said, quote, Travis will be Travis. That's the plan. As long as Travis shows up in the building, we've got Travis. So, but opportunities perhaps for more reps for Miller specifically, LeJontay Wester, the transfer from FAU, somebody who's been incredibly productive in his career so far. That offense with Sanders, at the helm, back fully healthy, it sounds like, and hopefully a little bit better offensive line, going to be a very exciting offense again this year. At USC, Connor Morissette of USCFootball.com was among the reporters who were on hand for the press availability for Lincoln Riley as the Trojans opened spring practice earlier this week. There's a little bit of shuffling on the offensive line, but also Riley, talked a little bit in more depth about how Miller Moss really kind of changed their approach to recruiting other quarterbacks in the transfer portal. If you remember, in December, Will Howard, who ended up at Ohio State, was connected to USC, I believe, made a visit there. But when Moss threw for 372 yards and 6 touchdowns and USC beat Louisville, it decided, hey, we're going to roll with Miller Moss and then maybe look for an experienced but still very young quarterback. And that ended up being Jaden Maeva, the freshman, Mountain West freshman of the year at UNLV last season. So they will compete, but it sounds like Moss has a real edge at the start of spring practice this week. One quick note, roster note there, Sair Wright was a former starter at defensive back for the Trojans, no longer listed on the 2024 roster. He had actually been away from the team toward the end of last season. Don Williams of the Lubbock Avalanche Journal had some notes on Texas Tech as the Red Raiders start practice. Baron Morton, not surprisingly, took all snaps as the number 1 quarterback, as you might expect. But one kind of interesting note that Williams passed along, Morton now, back and working to 100% health-wise. He had an AC joint injury that, quote, compromised his ability to run it, talking about the offense and pushing the ball down the field last season, but says here, though the injury did not require surgery, and Morton alluded to still getting strength back in his throwing shoulder. But Morton said, quote, spending hours and hours still in the training room trying to get this thing healthy, this offense is going to be very explosive. Continuing a little later on, he says, once a healthy shoulder comes back, we can open up the playbook and dive into some of those plays that we didn't get to see last year. He was asked to elaborate, according to Williams. He said, quote, more of the deeper plays, more play action stuff, the true air raid Texas Tech. We had to rely on Taj, running back Taj Brooks. He did a great job. The guys up front, too, they did a great job. But sounds like, and he continues here, finishing up, to open up the playbook and take shots we need to take downfield when it's time to take shots. We couldn't take those last year, but with a healthy shoulder and some guys up front that are going to be doing a good job, we're going to see more of that. So that's been a little bit of a topic of conversation in CFF circles. Taj Brooks, I think, is maybe even crept into the first round in some CFF drafts, based on just his level of production last year and his usage. And that's not what we would traditionally expect from a Texas Tech offense, to really lean on a running back. They did last year. Sounds like perhaps out of necessity. Not only did Brooks, do a great job, but Morton's shoulder really, it sounds like, did impact the play calling. So keep that in mind. Also, if you're looking for underrated CFF quarterbacks right now and receivers as well, a lot of Texas Tech options. It sounds like are going a little bit later than you might otherwise expect than they were the last couple of years. And certainly, if you were high on Texas Tech quarterbacks and receivers like I was last year, probably didn't work out super well for you. So maybe you don't want to overcompensate and be too low. But perhaps, especially if Baron Morton is fully healthy and that shoulder is back to 100%, or it will be by the season, maybe there's a little bit of value there. But one quick note, tight end Jalen Conyers, the transfer from Arizona State, one of the best tight ends in the country, reportedly broke his foot, which is going to sideline him for the spring. That is according to Williams of the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. So a few more very quick notes before we move on to Duke at TCU. Stephen M. Johnson early this week reported that Josh Hoover, the starting quarterback, will miss spring practice due to an injury. Jamie Plunkett of Horned Frog Blitz said that Hoover recently sustained an injury that will require surgery. So not good news there for TCU. Still expect that he'll be back for the fall, but quarterback position a little bit thin in the spring for the Horned Frogs. At Pitt, Stephen Thompson of the SI site that covers Pitt, All Panthers, I think. Might have the name wrong there. Sorry, I lost the name. Said that head coach Pat Narduzzi announced following spring practice number 4 that defensive end Nate Temple suffered a leg injury that is going to sideline him for the entire 2024 season. So that's very unfortunate news. At Purdue, a little bit of good news. Sam King of the Lafayette Journal and Courier noted that Jamal Edrin, who tore his ACL last season, inside the Panthers was the Pitt site, by the way. Edrin wore a red non-contact designation over his jersey, but according to the head coach at Purdue, Coach Walter said, I don't think I've seen somebody recover as fast as he has from that type of injury. But it's not a surprise because the way he's worked, he lives in the training room, he lives in the weight room. He didn't go home for any breaks, just rehab. But Edrin was somebody who, alongside Wester at FAU a couple of years ago, highly productive and perhaps somebody to keep an eye on moving forward. We'll save some notes on Michigan, Illinois, Florida, UAB, Temple, Utah State, Baylor for Friday, because I want to spend just a few minutes here at the end talking about the Duke Blue Devils. And, big story in college football, of course, Mike Elko is now the head coach at Texas A&M. He did really a remarkable job at Duke. 2 years ago, 2022, Duke kind of came out of nowhere. It looked like that program was just trending in the exact wrong direction at the end of the David Cutcliffe era. The numbers on paper didn't look good. Nobody knew who this Riley Leonard guy was. And Duke just exceeded all expectations. Last year, they were really, really high in a lot of those returning production categories. And unfortunately, as you all know, Riley Leonard was not 100% for last season. That played a big role in Duke, which of course started, very strong. The big upset win over Clemson on Labor Day night. They started 5-1, the only loss being to Notre Dame, where Riley Leonard suffered that injury. Beat NC State, a very solid NC State team, held them to 3 points in mid-October, but then lost 4 of 5, including tough road trips back-to-back at Florida State, at Louisville, and then a heartbreaker in overtime, double overtime at North Carolina. And then they also lost at Virginia. A bit of a surprise there, but when you're playing 4 games and 5 weeks away from home, that's a tough schedule. And they didn't have Leonard, or at least not fully healthy for that stretch. They did rally, and at the end of the year, Duke finished pretty strong. Beat Pitt, beat Troy, a really, really solid Troy team in the Birmingham Bowl, 17-10. But this year, Elko moving on, bring in Manny Diaz, who most recently was the defensive coordinator at Penn State. Prior to that, of course, the head coach at Miami, in my opinion, got a little bit of a raw deal in the transition to Mario Cristobal. But Manny Diaz is inheriting a little bit of a tough situation. Riley Leonard, of course, is gone. He's at Notre Dame now. Leading rusher Jordan Waters is gone. He's going to be at NC State. We've talked about him a few times. Jalen Calhoun, out of eligibility. Tight end Nikki Dalmelin as well. The offensive line, they had a lot of guys get starting experience last year. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 offensive linemen started at least 6 games. But 5 of those players are gone. Headlined, of course, Graham Barton, who did struggle a little bit with injury, but is going to be a pretty high draft pick in the NFL. draft later this spring. But of course, they also lose Jack Hornibrook, Jacob Monk, and Maurice McIntyre, all of whom were full-time starters. And then Scott Elliott, who started 6 games, transferred out as well. Did a little bit of work bringing in some experienced offensive linemen, some starting experience in Zachary Franks and James Pogarich. But when you throw in, the guys that are moving on, either transferring elsewhere like Leonard and Waters, or out of eligibility like Calhoun, who was the second leading receiver, 50 catches, 666 yards, and 4 touchdowns, or those offensive linemen, it doesn't look great in terms of returning production. 45.4% in our adjusted offensive returning production numbers. That ranks 110th nationally. Pardon me. And the defensive numbers, not much better. They're 95th in our adjusted defensive returning production numbers. The top 3 tacklers do return. Actually, the top four of the top 5, I should say, are back. But some talented players moving on, transferring out. Dorian Mossy and Aeneas Peebles moving on to more premier spots. Al Blades is out of eligibility, as is Jeremiah Lewis, Cam Dillon, Dwayne Carter, Jamon Franklin. Carter, I think, might have actually had another year of eligibility, but moving on to the NFL where he should be drafted. RJ Oben transferring out, and he was limited at times last season, played 10 games, but he ended up at Notre Dame as well, I believe. Yes, Notre Dame. So Duke is a team that traditionally doesn't rank super high in our roster strength numbers. In fact, they might be well below FBS average when it comes time to, when we have our fully updated 2024 team profiles. They might be near triple digits in roster strength when you just look at the amount of turnover on the offensive side of the ball. Jordan Moore is a player I really like at wide receiver, the former quarterback who transitioned after Riley Leonard beat him out for that quarterback job 2 years ago. We've seen some real breakout moments and some that make you think that he's got even more potential, but working on getting more fully established in a new offense. And Malik Murphy, the incoming transfer from Texas, who got a little bit of time as the starter last year when Quinn Ewers went down, a very exciting player to build around. Javon Harvey, who was good at times, though not always on the field at Old Dominion last season, but seems like he's going to come in and work alongside Moore and Samir Haggins and other receivers. But there's a lot of turnover, and even though the schedule is manageable, Duke does have the opportunity, I think, to get off to a pretty decent start. Should certainly open 1-0 with a victory over Elon on August 30th. A trip to Northwestern, toss-up game, but Northwestern, a team that, similar talent-wise, similar expectations, went to a bowl game last year, surprisingly, but that'll be a little bit of a toss-up. UConn at home in week 3 at Middle Tennessee, who also has a new head coach in Mason. Why can't I? His first name just left me. But Middle Tennessee, definitely another team in transition. That's a winnable game. 4-0 is certainly a possibility. 3-1 seems maybe about right. And in ACC play, are there any just overwhelming matchups? No, not necessarily. The month of October is tough. After getting North Carolina to open ACC play on September 28th, they go to Georgia Tech, then a week off, and then here's this 4-week stretch: home against Florida State on a Friday night, home against new ACC rival SMU, then at Miami, at NC State, back-to-back weeks in the first 2 Saturdays in November is tough. Get a week off, then home against Virginia Tech, at Wake Forest. There are certainly 6 or 7 or 8 winnable games. There might be even more games where you could argue they are winnable. They're not going to be guaranteed losses even against Florida State, Miami, or NC State. But that particular stretch of those three teams in 4 weeks is tough. If they were able to get through that 2-2, that'd be a major win, I think, for Duke. 1-3, probably the most likely. 0-4, definitely a possibility. But this Duke team, especially if Murphy comes in and plays up to his ability, if Manny Diaz, who has a long history as a really, really aggressive defensive play caller, his teams have always done well turning the football over. And that's something that analytically, there are arguments to be made that turnovers are often, turnover luck is a term for a reason, but some teams, for whatever reason, seem to do it a little more consistently, and Manny Diaz's units have often been in that group. So if Duke is able to, cause a lot of havoc on the defensive side of the ball, cause a lot of turnovers, based on, the competitiveness we've seen in recent years, it's not, out of the realm of possibility for Duke to be somewhat consistent, to be a team that shoots for 7 or 8 wins. But with so much turnover, coaching staff wise, roster wise, if some injuries pop up again, I am concerned about the depth, especially with the returning production numbers down. I mentioned a lot of winnable games. There's a lot of losable games here as well. I mean, how many guaranteed wins are there? Elon, could you see Duke getting upset by UConn or Middle Tennessee? Yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, they'll be favored in those games, and they certainly could lose to Northwestern. So, the range of possible outcomes for Duke, as it stands to me right now, is very wide. It could be 3 wins, could be 8 wins, anywhere in between. I think is definitely possible. So, Duke's a team that I'm curious to see how all the moving pieces kind of come together. But that will wrap it up for us today. Again, thank you for tuning in on this Thursday after we had to push our normal Wednesday episode a day. We will be back tomorrow on Friday. As I mentioned, plenty to cover, a lot of teams, especially we'll dig into some group of 5 teams that we didn't get a chance to talk about today. But this has been episode 25 of Good Morning College Football. I am Nicholas Ian Allen of CFB Winning Edge and CampusToCanton.com. If you would, please give this video a like, subscribe to the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. Consider becoming a member at CampusToCanton.com for as little as $2.99 per month, or get access to everything we've got to offer all the way up at our All 22 package, our C2C Winning Edge package as well. We very much appreciate your support and appreciate you tuning in with us this morning. We'll see you Friday for episode 26 of Good Morning College Football.